All right, this is the introduction into our still life painting. Before I start instruction, I want to show you a bunch of pictures of different types of still lifes to inspire you, give you ideas, and help you decide what kind of still life you want to do as we're starting this unit. So first you have the option of going photorealistic with your painting, picking out objects and painting them like they are actually a photograph. This is called photorealism. That's a great example. This is also an example of photorealism. It almost looks like you just took a picture and framed it on the wall. This takes a lot of attention to detail. It takes patience. So if you are one of those artists who is very patient and likes detail, this might be the style that you want to hone in and practice. This is not the only style. You could take it a different direction and start to abstract things a little bit while looking at your objects. These objects are obviously broken down into triangles, diamonds, and different chunks that are very geometrical as they're painting. This is a method of blocking in where you're painting chunks of colors, but here the chunks are very controlled. Your chunks don't always have to be controlled. This is an example of very loose chunking. In fact, this is usually referred to as a painterly style in the painting world, where you take your brush and you just stroke in a color of light yellow or stroke in a color of purple here in the shadow, a spot of red, and there's very minimal blending. They're really just painting in a hunk of color and letting it dry and leaving it. It tends to be looser. It has a lot more movement. You can see this cloth is really just pink, but there's a lot of movement to it just because of how they stroked that paint in. So that's an option. You could also do a lot of what we call scumbling or dry brushing, where you take some paint and you don't fill your brush up all the way. You don't hardly use any water, and you dry brush on top of one color and then the next color, and you can see like this red here is dry brushed over the green, and the green is kind of speckling through where that red did not cover, and it's very kind of spotty and chunky. To me, it kind of feels more like a concrete kind of feel of a painting. You know, if you were to paint on concrete, there's going to be little spots shining through because of the mountains and valleys in that surface. So you kind of want to think about what you're attracted to and what you want to try to go towards as you're starting to compose and paint. This composition is pretty simple. It's all pairs, but yet the background has a lot of movement, not because there's anything in it, right? It's just white cloth, but there's a lot of movement in the colors and how they're stroking the paint. You know, the paint's up and down here, it's sideways there, there's a shadow that's diagonal there. It helps create a lot of movement, even though it's a very simple background. You could tighten things up a bit and really control your sections. You know, each section of the apple is painted individually. It's very controlled. They each have its own color. They're staying inside the lines. That's also a method as well, if that's something that you're interested in achieving. Color choices are up to you. You do not have to paint the correct color of the object you're seeing if you don't want to. You can change the color of an object, so keep that in mind as you're designing and planning today or this week, because that can definitely change in the end. If you are more of an abstract artist, you could take these objects and break them down and make it more Picasso-like, where you're taking just the shapes and the suggestions of different parts of your items and repeating it, breaking it apart different ways to make it less realistic and more abstract. You could certainly add your own flair. This person is putting in patterns on top of their objects, which obviously are bananas, to give it more of a textural, tactile kind of feel. Like I said before, you can choose any colors. Here you can play around with pushing the colors to the extreme, using every single color to make it vibrant and exciting. You could certainly pair this painting with your drawing skills. If you are a huge drawer and you're like, I'm not quite into painting all the way, Miss Green, I want to use my drawing skills, that's great. That's putting drawing components within the painting and have it half drawn, half painted. It still has to tie together and feel unified, but this would be a nice example of adding and drawing with the painting in an abstract way. You can certainly use your knowledge on manipulating forms and take your different bottles and cups and make them do things that don't actually happen in real life. You're still using your forms, and you can still compose things with them in a fun, unique way. Adding extra things to your objects is always a unique flair as well. Or giving them character, making them come to life. This one always makes me chuckle, an apple eating an apple, what cannibalism there is in this particular piece. Kind of comical, fun, but still a still life. So those are just some inspirational pictures that I wanted to show you. Now, the biggest challenge is actually setting up the still life. We have to consider a lot of different things as we're setting up. It's a lot harder than you think. So picking out the right objects is the most important thing. I have given you a task of picking out 3 objects that are different sizes and shapes. And the reason for that is we need variety. Okay, it's the first thing I'm going to look for in your objects. Do your objects have variety? So you're looking at sizes to start. And this is a nice example because 3 peppers are all the same size. Very boring if everything's the same size. Whereas if you take 3 different sizes, small, medium, large, it tends to make a better composition when you're looking at it in the end. You do also want to try to get different shapes. Okay, here on the left, very boring. It's the same kind of bottle over and over and over again. The same kind of cylinder over and over again. Throwing in some different shapes like a teapot, a cup, a vase, squiggle vases, teacups. It's very more interesting, or much more interesting, if you incorporate different kinds of shapes. You also want to consider overlapping today as we start to arrange our objects. The overlapping has to have variety as well. You don't want to space everything out 1, 2, 3 like it's in a lineup, ready to go to the bathroom, lining up to go to the bathroom. You want to make sure that it is all a little bit different. So some bottles are overlapped a little bit, some are overlapped completely, some might have a corner overlapped, and others might have a side overlapped. You want to make it all a little bit different. Okay, be patient. When you're arranging, it can be hard sometimes. So there's my patient encouragement. As you're arranging, though, I want to put this on your radar. Focal point. We learned this in Drawing and Painting 1. It's the part where your eye goes to first. You want this focal point to be placed in one of these blue circles. Okay, you have 4 options, whether you're working with a landscape shape or a portrait shape. It has to be on the rule of thirds. Avoid at all costs putting your focal point in the very middle. Okay, no chickens in the middle. It kills all movement in the end. We do not want to bullseye it. So some different strategies to create focal points and direct the eye to that focal point would be using some sort of leading line through a certain special object. So here, this apple here is special. The cloth in the background leads my eye right to it and through it. You could also change the value of your special object to make it extra special as you are designing. You could increase the size, make it pop out because of the size different. You could incorporate extra detail on that one section that's extra special, your focal point. You could alter it, right? Change it up. You could play with different rotations, spot the difference. What's different? Your eye will go to what is different as you are arranging your objects, right? Different position, different color. So those are things you might want to consider as you're arranging. The next thing you want to consider is your eye movement. This is how your eye travels around the composition. So my sample image that I like to use here, very simple, shows different ways of traveling. The first way of traveling is up the pole. Any leading line you have, whether it's a pole, a pencil, anything long like a string in your objects will cause your eye to move along that line. Okay, even if you don't want the viewer to follow along that line, it will. It's an innate thing that our brains just do. Our brains also follow arrows and things pointy. So these little triangles and the umbrella point downward. Our eyes are naturally going to point down because of the pointy arrows. Our brain also follows like kinds. Anything that's repeated that's the same, like these little circles. Circle, 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 circle. Triangle, 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 triangle. Our eye and brain will follow that repeated mark. Okay, so when you do that, this particular image actually creates a circular movement, which is a good thing in drawing and painting. You want your eye to go in a circle. You don't want your eye to escape out of the side. Be careful, there are something called implied lines. These are lines where your eye follows if you have any kind of object with a head. Okay, so if you have like a statue that's a duck and your duck is looking to the right, it's going to create movement to the right. If you have something that has a pointy spout, like a teapot, the teapot spout will point your eye to whatever direction it's pointing. So just be careful as you are arranging objects. You look for those pointy things or those statues with eyeballs. Okay. An example of that in action, here's a drawing and painting. It's not a still life, but you can see how this applies on really anything. This lady is looking up. That's an implied line. The hand creates a direct line down. All right, you are following the arm down and your brain picks up similarities. So this arm almost creates a line. It's light peachy color and then it comes down and then this arm creates another line bending you back up. And oh look, there's a lot of familiar paths and arms I can travel along back up to this face and on to the circle I go over and over and over. Okay. Same thing here. Now this is with a still life. Most powerful eye-catching section is actually this white cloth because of the bright color. This creates a direct line, okay, moving this direction. It kind of points you up this way because it comes to an end, and the artist is putting in a dresser back here with repeated circle ovals to cause your brain to move across, your eyes to move across this top section so you don't fling out of the top. Okay, we don't want to fling anyone this way and lose their attention. So they're recapturing the attention by repeating these little knobs in the dresser, or even the dresser creates a straight line across. Now careful, you don't want to lose your viewer here. All right, so they're lightening this edge to kind of pull you back down. Or if you're moving along this line, look, this pot bends you back around. Okay, the corner of the table brings you around so you don't fall off the corner. And back into the circle of doom you go. Okay, so that's a great example of movement in action. Same thing here. Here's an implied line, right? The person's looking to the left, implied line. They're keeping you from falling off the page by trapping your view with like this little cord on a phone or something. So it's cropping the corner. The feather points you back in. This is always interesting. This cup is laid on its side, and I think they're doing that, one, to round the corner to keep you from falling off the edge, but also to take this movement here with the feather and bend it back this way. All right, it almost creates like an X kind of shape. And then this handle is strategically placed to diagonal the movement back down. Okay, now if this little handle was moved to right here, it would point you off this direction and you would fly off the side of the page. Okay, so still lifes are strategically placed, and it's a very thoughtful process when you are arranging as an artist. Okay, so placement's important. Another thing you want to consider, lots of things to consider, is your point of view. Where are you going to be viewing your objects? Are you going to be standing above them looking down, like this setup? Okay, does that help or hurt your composition? Are you going to be standing directly above them? Because that definitely changes the composition and how you overlap things, right? Overlapping. This does not have very much overlapping. Everything is spaced out. Are you going to sit at the table and stare at your objects? See every single object in your painting? Are you going to zoom way in and only see parts of your objects and just consider painting little sections as you're really close up front in the face of the objects, almost like you're a cup itself sitting on the table looking at your still life? Okay, or a little ant crawling on the table. What might that look like? Okay, so depending on how close you get will definitely affect your composition. I set up a little thing of pears, okay, that looks like this, zoomed all the way out, and was doing some compositional tests. You know, where is my focal point? Right, my focal point in this case would be my three little grapes right here, testing it to see if it's in the rule of thirds, divided into thirds both directions. But then I started to crop it, move it in closer. You know, is it still in the rule of thirds, or is it in kind of in the middle? Does that help it or hurt it? Then I cropped it into a square, and that helped it a little bit more because now my grapes are more in the rule of thirds and less in the center, like this back image. Then I cropped it in even more, and now my grapes are not the focal point anymore. It's the stem of the pear because of how close I am to the actual objects. Very different composition. Okay, so you want to consider that you do not have to show all of your objects. You could definitely set a bunch of things up and then just focus on a small section. But you won't know what your composition looks like until you look through and crop out part of your still life. And I personally like to do that with a little piece of paper that looks like this. Okay, kind of cut a little rectangle out of a piece of paper and hold it up. The closer you get to your face, the bigger it's going to look. The further away you get, the smaller it's going to look. Okay, and this is a great tool because then when we go to sketch it this week, you will have a little cropping of what it should look like, and we can use our tools like pencils to help us transfer what we see onto paper. We can use our rulers to help us see the angles, put that onto paper, looking something like this. And we're going to be doing some thumbnail sketches in class of our objects that we have selected and arranged. Okay, so that is where we're going with this unit. So I wish you luck, and let me know if there are any questions.